Yoshio Sasaki, Roshi, a Japanese Zen master, made a distinction between looking and seeing, and I tried to write something that illustrated the difference. So imagine two photographers, an American photographer and a Japanese photographer. Both are assigned by different magazines to go photograph the cherry blossoms, one in the Washington tidal basin and the other one in downtown Kyoto or something. So the American photographer will say, brings a wide-angle lens, a 50-millimeter lens, a telephoto lens, multiple filters, etc. Takes the high-angle shot, the low-angle shot, the side shot, and uses each lens, changes all the filters, and with about 3 rolls of film, he comes up with, or she comes up with several hundred images, goes back to the editor, and they sit down and look at them and choose the best to publish. The Japanese photographer comes with a single lens, sits down in front of a tree and looks at the tree for 15-20 minutes, gets up, moves around a little bit, sits down again, meditates on the tree for a bit, goes around, sits around. You know, that may take an hour, 2 hours, and finally maybe goes back to an original, or an earlier spot, sits down and takes one exposure, or 2 maybe, and goes back to the editor. So what I say about that is that the American photographer never allows the tree to speak to him.
What?
He talks to the tree. The American photographer talks to the tree and doesn't let the tree ever speak. What the Japanese photographer does is let the tree tell him or her where the tree best reveals itself to somebody. I don't know if that's a useful thing.
That's exactly what Cézanne used to do as well.
I sensed it.
He would look at, he would observe something for hours, he would paint many different versions of it from different angles. He would look around the object. That's why the perspective is often skewed in his work, or where an outline is actually, detaching itself and describing the contour, because he's moving around constantly, trying to get the best position and then repainting it from that particular perspective. And your point is, I think, very significant, because for the Western viewpoint, the tree is already a picture. It's already a representation. For Eastern eyes, I don't know what it is, but I know that for instance, the Japanese printmakers of the 19th century had a very different viewpoint of what constituted a picture.
Why don't we take another 5 minutes of questioning Kieran, and then we'll take this last.
One more part of this is talking about going beyond Merleau-Ponty. I'm a big fan of Merleau-Ponty. And in the his book on perception, he talks about lying down on the ground and looking up at the sky and giving himself over, yielding to the sky, and the sky blues in him. Now, what would Cézanne quibble with that characterization?
No, that's exactly what he means by the landscape thinks itself in me, I am its consciousness. That's exactly what's meant by that.
So how did he go beyond Merleau-Ponty? And
what
do you make of that?
Well, what Poteat says is, I'm actually referring to a point in the essay where he says, the most astute interpreter of Cézanne up to now has been Merleau-Ponty. But when he makes a distinction between the surface of the work and the content behind it, he falls back into the regnant categories of the metaphysical tradition. That is, the opposition between, or the distinction, dualism between surface and depth. And that as a result, this prevents him from a full or completely understanding Cézanne, simply because the language and vocabulary of the tradition, he says in this essay, Poteat says in this essay, is deeply compromised and cannot be used. We have to find new terms to describe this. And he uses the terms, he actually uses Cézanne's terms, materializing sensations and waiting until the landscape thinks itself in me, in order to be able to actually fully.
First a comment and then a question. I want to say, I really think you're doing something very important. A really moving interpretation of Poteat and implications in new and really fruitful directions. So I really want to affirm that. Secondly, it seems the discussion here, at least, I don't know how much it's you or how much is Poteat here, the alleged unknowableness of things. Clearly it's unrepresentable, no question.
Yeah.
I have an essay in Tradition of Discovery in which I construe Polanyi's understanding of tacit knowing as knowledge by acquaintance.
I know.
And the implications of that. And
I like
thinking
it. I
of
like
knowing along those lines, it seems to me permits a recognition that indeed we do and can know the heterogeneity of things in the way you're talking about, but we cannot, we're stuck with representing except by way of reference to the here-ness of our own body. I mean, it's only by reference to our own particularity that we can do that. Does that make sense? I mean, that would be a way of talking about knowing, but not being able to represent it explicitly.
Yes. It's just in this essay he says strictly that Hechetas is unknowable. He says that it can only be shown, it cannot be said, and therefore unknown. And he repeats that over and over again. That's one thing. And the second thing, in relation to this knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description, isn't it? Russell's
well, by representation.
Or by representation, the same thing, exactly. I'm uncomfortable with Russell's distinction because
I depart from Russell, but anyway.
Russell says that the only thing that is really known by acquaintance is sense data.
And that's absolutely false, yeah.
And that, so
In fact,
it's already...
I'm saying knowledge by acquaintance doesn't make any sense apart from the
it's already...
our body,
And that's
mind-body relationship.
that's my issue with it. And I love Russell. And I think that's a brilliant distinction. But I think he then, in order to try to follow the implications of that distinction, he had to retreat further and further back into this kind of regressus that goes back into sense data as being the only thing that is known by acquaintance. And so therefore undermines and subverts this really important distinction that could have gone in a completely different direction. That's my issue with that. But I do think it's a good mapping as well in that, in order for, if you like, analytically minded thinkers to understand Polanyi.
Kieran,
what was
thank
the
you.
other thing?
We have to carry this conversation
Okay.
on, so we give Murray a chance. So thank you very much.